Hello everybody, my name is Michael Absha and welcome back to Behind the Frame. Now Behind the Frame is a series of videos where myself and fellow wild eye guides talk you through our edits on certain images from all across the globe, and in this particular episode I'm going to be taking you through to the Serengeti, where we managed to capture a very iconic moment. Now, what makes this photograph and this moment so unique is because it basically allowed us to capture everything that this safari kind of holds in terms of what you want to achieve and see out in the Serengeti was captured in this moment and in this photograph. So it was captured in the eastern or southeastern Serengeti in an area called Gall Koppies. And let's go straight into Lightroom and have a look at what we're working with. So this particular image is not the one we want to work with, but just off to the right of it, see this little boulder over here? Just off to the right of it is another big round boulder, but this is the kind of scenes that we get to enjoy in the Serengeti, lions climbing up on these rocks. But this is the particular moment we want to look at and work with here in Lightroom today. And the reason why I say it just kind of sings southern Serengeti is because we've got lions on these koppies, on these rocks, and massive herds of plains game, being zebra and wildebeest out there. If I move over to that previous image, if I zoom out to there, you can see that mass black patch over there. That's hundreds of thousands of wildebeest and zebra all over these plains. Now, this particular morning was super special because we had to travel quite a distance to get to where these koppies are. Because Gall Koppies is a massive region, and in the past it was used for research purposes, and over the years they opened it up to us as tourists. You pay for the permits, and so we ensure that every single tour we take into the Serengeti and the southern Serengeti, we pay for these permits so that we can go and enjoy it, because it's obviously, if it was used for research and documentary purposes, obviously tells us that it is very prolific, really good for predator viewing, being lion and cheetah in this region. Big cheetah research still happening there, and we absolutely love it out there. So the last stint of our Best of Serengeti safaris in the southeastern Serengeti, with majority of our time being spent in the Gall Koppies region. So let's delve straight into processing this very cool photograph. So if I tap I while in the develop module, you'll see this was back in the day where I was still shooting Canon, and nice and early in the morning. You can see mid to late morning. And if I tap I again, ISO 400, nice and low. F8, which gives me enough depth to see good enough detail on the zebra in the foreground. It starts kind of blurring and fading out from over here, but still enough depth within the scene to see what's going on. And a shutter speed of 2,000th of a second. I could have probably doubled this to f16, had 1,000th of a second, and got even more in focus and in within the scene and in the depths. But I'm more than happy with this result, and happy that I was shooting at f8 and not f16. But the lens I was using, I was at 142 millimeters with a 70 to 200, and in my opinion, the best lens to use when in the Serengeti as well as in the Masai Mara, because placing animals in an environment like this and not going in super tight and shooting at 400 the whole time, even though this has its time and its place, this looks really cool. I love my wider shots from the Koppies and the Serengeti in general. So be sure to pack something within that range. Even 100, 400 would work, 100, 500, whatever it may be. But you do want a bit of the space on these edges. All right, so seeing that it is quite late morning, and as mentioned, this is a common thing. They don't generally go up here first thing in the morning. You can see the lights already very bright and harsh. And it was, as I'd mentioned, a very cool moment. We were driving a long distance to get there. We got there, and usually as the day warms up, these cats tend to make their way towards these koppies or granite boulders, whatever you want to refer to them as, because as the sun heats them up, they've had a cold night, cold morning, they want to go lay up on these rocks, relax, warm up, and then eventually retreat to the shade once the heat of the day sets in. And on this morning, we were driving, and I was standing overlooking the top of our vehicle. As Eastern Africa or East Africa, there's a pop top in the vehicle, so you can stand up and look over the top. And as we kind of came over this hill, I just saw there were probably like 20 lion. I think there were 27 in this pride, to be exact. Came walking towards us and towards that big sharp rock that you saw that one young male lion on. And we had all these lions up on the rocks, drinking from pools on top of the rocks, the younger animals playing. And it was just such an incredible moment. And as things started to settle, the one lioness that you see in this photograph decided to go hunker up onto this round boulder. A bit later, one of her sisters actually joined her and sat over here. But you'll notice that she's got a collar on, which we kind of guesstimated that this girl was the matriarch of the pride, and she got up onto this boulder, had a beautiful vantage point of the Golkopi Plains with these thousands of wildebeests and zebra around her, and she was probably there to kind of overlook the plains and monitor the movements of these herds for her decision making later that evening. Which direction do we move into to follow either a wildebeest that she saw was wounded or hurt or weak or whatever the case may be. And that's probably she took that position to just kind of scan across the plains to make her decision in terms of where do we go look for food later that night. You can see they were already pretty well fed, big bellies. So they had just come out of the plains, and shame one of these guys lost their cousins or uncles because, yeah, this pride definitely ate the night before we got to see them. So let's jump straight into the edit. So I've tapped R to get into my crop. I'm going to go choose a 16:9 ratio. Reason being is that it often seems to kind of give your viewers a sense that it was shot slightly wider. You can see my horizon was well off, so do what I say, not what I do. But fortunately, we can use this angle tool to realign it, either by moving it over here, pinching next to the frame itself, or using the angle tool, clicking and holding and drawing across the horizon to give us a nice straight horizon. So what we could do is, I would say something like that. I would probably draw it a little bit further to the right, but you will see I'm eliminating this tree because I cut some of the tree off on the far right. It would have been nice to have that entire tree in there. So I'm rather just going to crop it out, but this is allowing me to divide the frame pretty evenly. On the far right here, we've got the depths of the story and the endless rolling plains, and then this bush anchoring it. In the center, we've got this hill over here, some more wildebeest and kind of anchoring stories, and this foreground rock. And on the far left, the rock with the lioness in the center and the sky in the top left. And then on the horizons, we've got the sky, we've got the lioness, the hills, and the endless plains. And in the foreground, we've got the rock she's with on, the subject she's looking at, and an anchoring shrub to the bottom right. So there's really good balance. PowerPoint on a main subject that we want our viewers' eyes to lock onto. So there's really good motion and flow within this photograph, and that will be my crop. Before we move on, you'll see there's a very bright reflection over there, something we want to get rid of. So going into our clone and heal tool, I want to make sure that I've selected heal, being this band-aid. If you are not sure if there are any dust spots or marks within your image, you can just tap A, and this will help you visualize any dust spots, and you can go and change it from darker to brighter areas. But right here it's telling us we've got a very bright spot over there, and that's called for a bit of an issue. So if I tap A again, it will obviously tell us that it was that very bright spot there. So again, resize our cursor tool. If I select it, Lightroom is smart enough to actually go and choose an area suitable to balance in with the surrounding pixels, and it blends in. You can't even see that I had fixed that at all. So from this point onward now, we can go and process and edit this image. So as we can see by looking at the histogram, there is a lot of black and darker areas, hence, or because of these dark shadows within these regions over here. There's good midtones, so this like kind of grayed out dull sky and the dull color coming off the foreground and the lion and the rock, but there's no real highlights nor whites. So what we'll do here is I'm going to pull my whites. I'm pushing and holding Option, left clicking my cursor, and I'm going to draw my cursor to the right. Watch that histogram change quite a bit. All right. And then I'm seeing a little white dot in the bottom right corner of the frame. I don't know if you can see that. If I go zoom into this, can you see that little white dot? And that's literally all I want. I don't want to have a lot of white, because in these highlighted areas, we're losing detail in those pure white areas. So I literally just want a speck like that. And I'm going to do the same for the darks. A little bit more there because that's a dark shadowed area, so I don't really mind losing detail there. I don't want my viewers' eyes to go fix and sit in that region. I want them to look at the lioness on the rock. So just by doing that, you can see there's already quite a big difference in terms of the contrast pop and the look and feel of the image. Shadows, what we could do is maybe just lift them up ever so slightly. It'll give us a little bit more detail in these areas and the shaded part of the cat, but I'm not going to be too, because if you go too much, yes, it might look nice, but it's going to seem extremely flat. So we can just go a very little bit. And then highlights, I'm probably also just going to push ever so slightly just to get that back into play. There's no detail in the sky. I don't want to preserve clouds. So to me, that is looking good, and the histogram's looking fairly healthy as well. I'm going to push my texture to the right to target especially my animal with the fur, but then also because I want to get more detail throughout the scene, possibly push up clarity just a little bit, but not as much. So somewhere like that. All right. Before we move on, probably going to, in white balance, drop the temperature ever so slightly, just so that it's slightly cooler, a little bit more blue, and it will aid to the fact that this was photographed in the morning. Under tone curve, what we could do is push, actually wouldn't even do anything here, to be honest. I think there's good enough balance here. Maybe just the highlighted region, pull that to the right. Because as I'd mentioned, there's no real detail in that sky, so we don't really need to be aware of blowing anything out. But by pulling that right, it's just helping us balance our histogram ever so slightly. And then come down into HSL. Remember the blue sky. I generally like to start working with luminance, but here we can just go up the luminance of that blue. But by doing that, it's desaturated it somewhat. So I'm going to just pull that to the right just a little, just to keep a bit of that blue tinge in the background. But by making this slightly brighter, is now helping me make what is in the foreground now, my lioness, which is now slightly darker, and this rock pop off just a little bit more. So if I zoom into this area, you'll see how by putting that on and off, the dark lioness is bouncing off of a brighter background a lot more than she was. It's a little bit too bright. Than she was when she was when her luminance was almost blending into the luminance of the background. So something like that's looking good. I'd probably under luminance also go drop the greens and the yellows somewhat to darken up that foreground. If you don't know what color you're working with, just pick up, left click on that little tool. You can go hover over the screen and you'll see if I'm hovering in the sky next to blue, the plus 24 has now got a little gray box around it. If I come down to the foreground, I've got yellows, greens. So it tells you exactly what colors you need to go and adjust and work with. So by dropping the luminance of the yellows and so on the foreground, it's just making it pop off of that bright background a little bit more, but also providing a bit more balance within the scene over here. So that's looking really good to me. Details, definitely going to push that up some, or not details, excuse me, sharpening, going to push that up a little bit. And my general go-to for wildlife is I take my radius to 0.5, because how sharpening works is it goes and looks for edge contrast. So where the bright lioness is meeting the dark background, it goes and adds edge contrast there in the pixels. So by going radius at 0.5, your radius is the amount of pixels. There you're adding 3 full pixels. And you can see that changed the image as well. I want to add 0.5 pixels, so half a pixel. Eliminates me over sharpening my image. Detail to 100 to find, or so that the software goes and looks for finer contrast within that scene. And then masking, I'm going to push and hold Option, left click my cursor. Now everything's being sharpened. All the white area is going to be sharpened. I'm going to draw this right. And you can see I can pretty much go to 100% here, because I literally just want the outline of my lioness, a bit of detail on her and the rock she's standing on, to be sharpened. I don't really want this hillside and the sky and this bush to be sharpened. And so the least amount of sharpening I can add to that, the better. But you just want to be mindful that majority of it sits on your subjects. So something like that to me looks really good. Now that is it for the general edit of this image. If we go look at that, it's really looking very pretty. But we can do a little bit more work here. So what we can do is, I probably wouldn't really want to go into the sky too much. To me, that's looking okay. But what I want to do is, let's try this quickly. Go into a radial filter, and I'm going to draw a very heavy filter like that. Make that feather a little bit stronger, but I'm also going to go and invert it. And the thing now is we can see that it is affecting the sky. So what I can go and do is say subtract the sky. Wham. It's not on the sky anymore, because now remember, previously I tried to brighten up that sky somewhat. Here I want to dampen the foreground highlights a bit. So I want to make it slightly darker. Work those shadows a little bit more. Bring those down, because now what this is going to allow is a slightly darker foreground. Now remember, something darker is going to pop off something brighter. So now a darker foreground is going to pop off what is now a brighter background. But having the brightest piece now being our lioness and this rock in the foreground as the brightest pieces within a darker foreground, your eyes are going to get drawn to the brighter area within the darker surrounds, if that makes any sense. So if I go put that on and off again, so that's before, that's after. That's before, that's after. And if we then go and say enter, enter, I don't think there's anything else to be done here. Maybe, if anything, let me go and select the brush, brand new brush, a nice low flow, because I don't want to add too much to this. By pushing and holding spacebar, I'm changing my cursor so I can zoom into my lioness and just paint on her ever so slightly. But I've kind of got this rock here a little bit, up the whites on that, up the shadows on that, and maybe just a little bit of clarity just in that region to make it slightly sharper, and then tapping Y. That's our before and after scene. To me it really looks cool. By pushing backslash, that's your before and that's your after. So we've really made her pop off from that scene and blending in that surrounding background over there. And a very simple photograph to take. The biggest thing to bear in mind is if you want that depth in the background and more of those zebra and wildebeest in focus, you want to up your apertures. But then when it comes to the editing of it, is obviously there was a lot of bright sky and many kind of mid-tones in the foreground. And how I now work this to my advantage is keep that bright background somewhat bright, because there's no clouds that I want to preserve in the sky. But by ensuring that the foreground and my subject, I don't go and do an edit where they're overly bright and it blends in with the brightness of the background. I'm making this dark foreground pop off of what's a fairly bright background. And that's basically the edit in this episode. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you learned something. And if you do have any questions regarding this particular image, the way I edited it, this particular region being the Serengeti, or the product Best of Serengeti, or any other photograph you've seen of mine, or any of the other wild eye guides, if you've seen any images online and you've got questions, please feel free to reach out to us, get in touch, and we will happily assist in answering any questions you may have. But until then, thank you for joining, and I'll chat to you soon. Bye-bye.